Bhavi Mehta. I'm a partner with Bain in our New York office. I lead our work globally at the intersection of financial services and AI. I've been doing that for almost 20 years now.
So a lot of our readers and viewers will be very familiar with Bain, but perhaps for those that aren't, do you mind giving us a high level kind of overview about the size, focus, and the kind of work you do as a group as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a global consultancy firm. We work across 40 countries, 65 offices. We work very closely alongside with our clients to make sure that they are competitive in their markets, as well as they are the redefining the industries and the change agents.
Makes sense. So obviously today we're focusing on banks in particular, and you spend your days
Yeah,
working with these people. What would you say are the top three things keeping bank CEOs awake at night at present time?
I'm sure there are many, but great question. I would say three things I think are very, very key these days. One is I think they're thinking about the economic dislocation in US from like policy changes, tariffs, and cuts. Um, Second, I think deregulation is absolutely, I think, welcome by the banks. At the same time, I think fintechs have been having a little bit of a pressure on from the regulators in recent years. So how that unfolds, I think both as a threat as well as a opportunity for them to partner with them. And I would say the third one, which is my favorite, the artificial intelligence and where that is taking. And it's not just an opportunity, but I think it's also its impact on their operational resilience. Like, would the fraud increase? Would they have more attacks, cyber attacks on their systems, and things like that?
So building on that then, so thinking specifically about how technology can address some of these challenges, uh, there's probably no shortage of initiatives and things you could be running after. But so what are banks prioritizing? They can only do so much in
Yeah,
any given period of time. What's the key priorities?
I think the key priorities for the banks really revolve around integrating these emerging technologies, like from artificial intelligence to blockchain, while overcoming the legacy infrastructure constraints and managing risk. Like, if I have to put it on like short, that's what they care about. So I do think still this year, next year, banks are going to be definitely spending a lot of their effort and time on modernizing the legacy systems. Many have migrated to cloud, some are still migrating, improving data management, and definitely shoring up cybersecurity. Uh, but longer term, I think they're all focused on how they can leverage AI, cloud computing, distributed ledger to increase and improve the experience of their customers and operations. While again, all of this needs to be done within the regulatory framework.
So perhaps if you could cherry pick some of those technologies that you see on the rise, and whether it's more near term or medium term, what are the most practical benefits or outcomes, maybe for the bank themselves, but perhaps also for us as consumers when the benefits starts to trickle down? What are the kind of standout benefits of the practicalities of implementing any one of these scenarios that you kind of illustrated?
Absolutely. So if I think about, I would pick first artificial intelligence. Um, Absolutely a lot of hype, if you want to say, over the last 18 months. This is the first time we are seeing the results also getting done very, very fast uh, in the bank's environment, obviously managing the risk. Um, but the most important thing that as a consumer, as an employee, that we will see is augmentation of our capabilities. Like, for example, if it's a customer service agent, how they can how they can get to a better answer for the customer. So both agent will see that as an efficiency improvement, customer will see that as a better customer experience. Pick another one like relationship managers slash wealth advisors. uh, it's very difficult for them to understand every conversation they have had with their clients in past, bringing all that information for them, significantly improved customer experience as well as for the world. Um, I would say also there is a bit around if I move away from the artificial intelligence, the other thing I would say is like real time payments and instant settlement. That has been a big area, especially in US. The rest of the geographies, especially in Asia, are ahead of us, but definitely in banks, both for the commercial customers as well as for individuals like us. I think that will be very, very helpful. And that also has, I think, an impact on fintechs, because banks' data is trapped uh, in silos, right? And fintechs are pretty good at like bringing in the technology. So they coming together will have a great partnership. So, for example, if my insurance settlement takes like many days today, hopefully it can be done even faster. And with that, in that real time payments, there is a there is a blockchain, digital ledger technologies that are also uh, play a big role. If I have to pick a
One thing,
third, yeah, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead, please. The third
No, I
one.
was just thinking. I was thinking like if I have to pick a third thing, I would say something that hasn't really fully materialized yet in US, but we have lessons from Europe is like around open banking and APIs, and I think that's going to come pretty soon, which will absolutely, as a customer, I will have a lot more control on my information, how it gets shared, how it is used, and I think banks will also have to figure out how to how to use that information when being given to them to make a better experience for the customers.
Well, so my follow-up question is going to be, this must be a little bit of a double-edged sword for the bank, thinking about faster payments and even open banking. So my understanding was the banks have been benefiting from being able to settle a few days after receiving money because they can leverage that money and deploy it in more beneficial ways for them, earn interest and whatnot. And same thing with open banking, I guess they can be disintermediated a bit easier now. So those must be bad things for them. So why would they embrace it? Or how do you think we're going to overcome the benefits versus the disadvantages and get the two to meet?
Yeah, I agree. Well, that is true. Um, but I go back to a philosophy, and I think banks who are really customer forward always think about it in terms of what's good for the customer. I would call it like good profit and a bad profit. If you can make good profit more, you don't have to, like, for example, in past we had overdrafts, right? And banks used to make a lot of money on overdrafts, but now overdrafts, people like either they've gotten rid of overdraft fees, or they give you a lot more time. And at the end of the day, banks are in a business of making sure that their customer expectations are fulfilled. So I do think that they will embrace this. Maybe, yeah, there will be some challenges in the short term, but I think both these trends, I do think, are in favor of the customer. And at the end of the day, it will come back to the banks in terms of whether offering new services to customers. Like, for example, we were just talking about fintech and insurance, right? Now you could have an embedded finance offering and things like that. When customers see some instant settlements, they will be happy and they will do more business with the banks.
And you kind of touched on this in a few ways, but where do you see the biggest inefficiencies are existing today within banks, the way the banks run themselves?
Yeah, you're right. I kind of touched on it like when I was talking about challenges, and I think one of the biggest one is the legacy infrastructure and the siloed system. So it's not so, and I would say there are two parts to it. One is like obviously how the infrastructure was set up, how their applications developed, how their core systems developed, which slows them down significantly. At the same time, I would say there is also a notion of business units, like that's more of an organizational structure, right? So they have data trapped in different business units, which has a component of systems, but it's also a component of I manage my data, right? So if you're in a bank, you have a retail, you have a credit card, So how do you think about like bringing all of that together? I think they have been really constrained with both their infrastructure and siloed systems. um, I think banks have made a lot of good progress in the front end when it comes to like facing the customer, like our apps or UIs. But if you really look behind, the back end and the middle office is still, I would call it semi-automated, not like fully automated, which means that yeah, I love the UI. I love how easy I can come to an experience. But when I do a transaction or when I'm like putting an application in the back end, there are processes that have to run that may delay the outcome. So I think the middle and the back office workflows also are very, very clunky in most of the organizations, which increases the error rates, processing times, and things like that. And if I have to
Yeah,
pick
I've
this
thought.
up, again,
Sorry to interrupt you again. I thought about that very when I'm doing transactions. I have two different banks, and you can tell that they've sort of cobbled together different systems. So maybe the front end looks great when I see that an overview of the accounts, but then when I go to do an international wire transfer, it kind of all breaks down and looks like I'm back in the 1990s again. So I relate very much to what you described there. So sorry, you were about to make another point as well.
I was just going to say, like, but to me, at the end of the day, like, I'm sure we can work through the systems over a period of time. But underpinning all of this is like just a broader, I would say, over a period of time, like some inefficiencies have creeped in the structure and the organization itself that doesn't allow them to move as fast as they would like. And like, I would have to say, like, I'm sure like every CEO is thinking about like, how can I move fast, right? And it becomes more challenging the bigger the bank you are, more challenging, more units you have, more data is trapped, more silos that you have. So
So you're kind of uniquely positioned in that you meet different banks. So you must have met some great sort of visionary leaders and some perhaps less efficient innovators. What characteristics do you think separates the winners from the losers here? What should be promoted within the bank to further innovation quicker?
yeah, I think there is one which is the kind of, we call it fast fail culture of experiment and learning. um, it is still not in the DNA of the banks fully. Like there are definitely banks who have embraced it and pockets and are doing very well, but it's still not fully in their DNA to test an idea, to see whether it works or not, fail, move on, right? So that's one. The thing that I said in like on the last part, which is siloed, right? Again, still there is not as much of a cross-functional collaboration across the units. So that also definitely something that they need to probably differentiate, and the banks that have done that better move fast, and that comes uh, with a strong clarity on the strategy. Like what are we really trying to achieve? Because if you are really looking for unit level P&Ls and how every unit performs, every unit is going to be thinking about their local optimization. If you're thinking about like, hey, I'm here for like customers and what is the outcome for my customers, then there probably is a lot more collaboration that will happen. So I think obviously culture is of experimentation is important, collaboration is important, but obviously if you do not have a clear alignment on the business strategy, none of that is going to work.
So changing tack a little bit, you mentioned fintechs already in the context of how banks innovate. So how do you stay on top of knowing which fintechs are working and solving problems that your bank clients might be interested in? Do you have any sort of specific conferences or newsletters or other sort of channels that kind of make sure that you're always on top of what you should be proposing or learning more about if it could become relevant for one of your bank clients later?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the simplest answer to that is like just be curious and learning all the time. I I I think obviously we have our own networks, right? So we have people that we work with. For example, my colleagues, even at Bain, like we do a lot of, we have a very strong private equity practice. We do a lot of diligences, having conversations with them, like what they are seeing in the market. I try to, obviously, some of the conferences like Money 2020 are good for a concentrated set of fintechs to come together and for you to kind of get a glimpse, the 50,000 feet level view of what's happening in the market. um, I definitely, LinkedIn is actually not that bad from that perspective. As soon as I see some of my friends, or connections getting connected to a new firm, I would just go and look it up. So I think for me, maybe I'm looking for that in everything that I'm reading, whether it's a newspaper I'm reading, whether it's a podcast that I'm listening, or whether it's like talking to the friends. That's how I do it. I don't think there's a big secret sauce, but I would say just be curious about it. If you love this area, you will find it.
One of the key challenges for fintechs to work with a big bank is that big banks are slow moving and they're very traditional. And young, nimble fintechs, they might want to move faster and they're perhaps a little bit more open to risk. What's the sort of sweet spot here to get the two to be able to work successfully? Have you seen good examples, also in terms of best practices, maybe even?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And because as you said, I work with so many fintechs who want to go into the banks, and then when we have a conversation with the banks, like it takes a long time. So I think the first thing, which seems very tactical, but I think very important, is the bank's third party compliance approval processes are strong, and many fintechs takes a lot of time to even go through that process to get into the bank. So if they could do some work up front to make themselves like fully aligned with some of the compliance and the regulations and the process, I'm not saying like 100%, but do your homework, right? To me, like that's actually very critical. So that's seems small, but it is very important, because if you don't do that, what happens is most of the times bank will put you into a sandbox, okay, which is not bad, to test your technology. And sure, it works, but then the questions will come back. Okay, are you fully compliant? Are you XYZ? And then you start another process. And by the time all of this happens, just the interest goes down, momentum goes down, things change. So that's one. Other is, like, at the end of the day, this, both banks and fintechs have to see it as a partnership, right? Versus, oh, I'm going to try new cool technology today, and then there might be something else tomorrow. And when I say partnership, I mean partnership both in terms of potentially co-investing in certain areas, partnership both in terms of how they think about their people come together. So, for example, remember when I talked about sandbox means like you're really cut off with the organization. You're working in a side trying to prove your technology. But really where the rubber hits the road is like when you're working with their people in their environment to make it work. So partnership also means like good communication, partnership, I want to say culture, mix of the two organizations. I think if I have to pick, obviously there are things around how you set up the commercials, how you set up the investment, but I think that is all possible. These are the two big things which I find challenging.
Bhavi, super interesting as always to talk to you. Thank you very much for your insight and look forward to following what you get up to going forward.
Absolutely, it was my pleasure. Thank you, Chris.